Today's webinar, where today obviously we're looking at the new build campaign, or the new policy that's been launched by the government, and changes to PD rights and the changes to planning policy. And in today's webinar, we're looking specifically at commercial conversions and how we can make the most of the back of those. Today, I'm delighted to introduce two guest speakers that we have. This is a follow-on from our guest speaker webinar series here at Nimbus Maps. And our two speakers today, firstly, Dan Rickett. He's partner at Rickett Architects. Dan, are you there? Can we get you on the screen? Can I get you to, there we go. Just ask you to start your video if that's okay. Hi, Dan. Welcome to today's webinar. So, how are you doing? All right?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Very good. So Dan is sort of here at Nimbus, we sort of talk a lot about building the right power team, i.e. the right professional team to make sure that you can deliver your schemes and kind of the ease that gives you through this process. And Dan is very much one of those people that's been on our power team for a number of years. We together have done about 50 planning applications, something like that, for residential work for lots of the big house builders and PLCs and this sort of stuff. So sort of worked together for a number of projects. So delighted to bring you into one of our webinars, Dan. Welcome.
Delighted to be here, thank you.
Fabulous. And number two, so our second speaker today is, we're delighted to introduce Ranjan Bhattacharya. So Ranjan, are you there? Can we unmute you and get you on video?
Hello there. Hi. Can you hear me okay?
How are you doing? Yes, are you well?
Yes. Pleasure to be here. Looking forward to it.
Slightly slow connection, I think, at the moment. So hopefully that's going to speed itself up. There we go. There he is. Hi, Ranjan. Are you all right? You well?
Yes, very well, very well. Really looking forward to this. It's a very exciting time, probably one of the most exciting times I've ever known for commercial property conversions. So we're going to have a lot of fun on this webinar and over the next few years.
Absolutely. So just to kind of, for those who don't know Ranjan, so Ranjan is a developer in his own right. He's the founder of a property training company that kind of specialises in commercial conversions. That's called Succeed in Property. Website is succeedinproperty.com. He's also runs the UK's biggest property meet, Ranjan, the Baker Street property meet. That's the biggest one in the UK, is it?
Yes. We back in the day when you could do live events, we got 300 people every month. So we're hoping to resume in January 2021. We'll be back with the monthly meetup for property investors.
And kind of last but not least, for those of you may recognise Ranjan from that guy off the TV. So Ranjan is also our kind of resident, dare I say, property dragon from what is the property elevator. So it's on Sky, yes. Sky Plus, Sky One, Sky something.
It's on Sky's Property TV, and Series 3 is going to be out in early October. It's basically a pitch show where property entrepreneurs come along and pitch their deals. And there are 5 of us angel investors, and we put up our own cash to fund these deals or not. So it's great TV, it's great learning, it's great to see what people are doing and what people get funding for.
Yeah, totally. So welcome, as I say, to today's webinar. Great to have you both. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us today. I suppose just to kind of set the scene, what I'd like to just sort of ask really is really just to get a feel for you guys and kind of why you do what you do. I suppose perhaps Dan, perhaps if you could start, kind of why Rickett Architects? What's your kind of your reason? What gets you out of bed and kind of why architecture? What's that all about?
Well, Rickett Architects actually was my father's firm. It was founded in '71, so it's my birthright, you might say. But the reason I'm really still involved, still doing it is because architecture is an ever-changing landscape. What began as a creative industry and a creative profession has now become much more of a problem-solving exercise. And it's the variety of work that we get involved with, from early doors land appraisals and feasibility work, through assisting with legal difficulties, land acquisition difficulties, through the planning system and the ever-changing, rapidly changing and complex building regulations. So it's the variety that keeps me going. And what gets me up in the morning is the alarm. be honest.
Too honest, Dan. You're too honest. You're too honest. and Ranjan, I suppose same question to you. Kind of what drives you? What sort of, I suppose, what was that kind of spark that said, right, I'm now going to start doing training? What is it that sort of really motivates you at the moment?
Well, I think I've always loved property. I've always loved property ever since my parents bought me a Monopoly set when I was 8 years old. You know, there's a natural logic to it. And I think
London is it? That's why.
I think property fundamentally is a very simple business. You know, especially when you do buy-to-let or commercial residential buy-to-let. What really floats my boat is the creativity. The creativity of taking a building that's is well located. You can see it had glory days and it was had a use, and then just turning that around, taking something that's defunct, and it suddenly has a use. It has a practical purpose, and it makes money. You just hit these all, and you've had to go at so much creativity in making that possible. People have passed that property for months, wondering, or years, wondering what the hell are they going to do with it, and you've just sort of found something that makes it work, that brings it back into use and makes money. It is satisfying. And the training really came about through, I mean, I teach what I do. I don't do, I don't run a variety of courses on, you know, serviced accommodation and this, that, and the other. I do commercial property and commercial conversions, and that's pretty much what I teach. And one of the things that I do, because I'm on YouTube, you'll see many case studies that I'll talk about when I do my talk. I've got case studies on YouTube for those. But many of those deals are ones that I actually invest in. So I kind of, because I've been doing this now for 30 years, I mean, I don't do, there's so many opportunities, particularly with smaller commercial buildings like shops and uppers, which I don't do that many of myself, because some of the projects I do are a little bit larger. But I tend to kind of teach people this stuff and then end up investing in their deals, because if they're doing something, you know, where I've taught them how to find the deals, how to appraise the site, how to do the feasibility, how to crunch the numbers, why wouldn't it be a winner? So it's all part of just doing what I enjoy, which is just creatively trying to find and repurpose buildings, and just waking up every day and having something that you get up to do that you just enjoy. So all the elements are just spun together based around what I'm passionate about. I like helping people do this stuff. I like making money. I like turning around defunct buildings. And basically everything I do is all around those themes.
High core pillars. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, that's great stuff. So let's kind of jump into sort of the main nuts and bolts today. So today, the first bit we wanted to kind of run through is just get Dan, perhaps if you could run us through a little bit of an update in terms of policy, kind of what those changes are, just to kind of give us a sort of the background of what the opportunities are for kind of where this has changed, if that makes sense. I think you've got a set of slides, have you? You could share with us.
I have.
Yeah, we'll just ping those up then, and we'll perhaps run us through that.
Okay, can everybody see that?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, absolutely. I always
think
good architects should have a well laid out, neat set of slides, and I think Dan's kind of overshadowing us all here. He's got the best picture on the three of us, and he's looking the most dashing, and now he's got the best set of slides as well. So
it's occupational hazard, but it's on. Don't worry, it's only skin deep. So
no pressure around for your slides.
Welcome to this. We'll do a quick gallop through the existing PD rights that apply to commercial buildings, and then go on to the how they've been adjusted and added to in the new regulations as of August this year. So currently, up until August 2020, there was 3 classes of permitted development rights that apply to commercial buildings: Class G, M, and O. Class G applies to the addition of 2 flats above, and it must be above an existing A1 or A2 use. That's shops or financial institutions. Class M applied to A1, A5 or certain sui generis uses. The caveat on that is that the building must have been in use on or before the 20th of March 2013, and it requires prior approval. Prior approval is going to be a theme that recurs through these slides, and we'll wrap up at the end about what that actually, the process and what that actually means.
Because prior approval, Dan, is more akin to a kind of a sort of watered down planning application rather than you just do it kind of thing.
Exactly that, yeah. It requires that certain aspects of the scheme comply with the requirements of the local planning authority before you can proceed with utilising permitted development rights. And that has been added to and extended, but we'll come back to that a bit later on.
Yeah, awesome.
Class O is probably the most the one we get most involved with, which is the conversion of offices B1 to residential. Again, the building is date stamped, so it has to have been in use for B1 on or before 29th of May 2013, and again, prior approval is required. Initially, the prior approval applied to demonstrating no adverse effect on flood risk, noise, contamination, and highways. That has been extended under the new regulations.
Cool.
So, just briefly, amongst the other changes that have been introduced under the GDPO are the proposed now use class changes. What the government have decided is that the existing use class categories are, having been updated several times, are now outdated and should be and a large proportion of commercial uses should be amalgamated to allow a freer change of use between the subclasses. So now what was A1, A2, A3, B1, D1 and D2 is now wrapped up under Class E. That comes into force from the 1st September 2020, but with reference to the change of use rights under the GDPO, they'll still refer, until July next year, they'll still refer to the existing use classes. And I guess that is to allow a certain amount of time, I'm speculating slightly, but that's to allow a certain amount of time to try and tie down any of the unwanted developments that could occur if all of the GDPO rights have applied to the new Class E.
I see. So, in fact, your old PD rights still apply to Class E, but a subset of Class E, and
yeah,
being used back in 2013 or whatever that date was that you mentioned a moment ago.
Yes, yeah, that's it. 2 further use classes have been added, F1 and F2, and these seek to protect learning and non-residential institutions and local community uses. So what they've done, they've defined important local community assets as being shops smaller than 280 square metres and without another shop within 1,000 square metres distance, or a hall or meeting place for the principal use of the local community, have been taken out of Class E and put into their own class F2, and that just protects them from unwanted development.
It's quite that's one of the things that, sorry to cut across and sort of do thunder, but one of the things I kind of think is interesting in this new F2 class is that pubs aren't part of that. And obviously our background's doing a lot of pub work.
Yes.
We spend a lot of time looking at pub protection policies, this kind of is like the first part of that journey. So in the kind of the pubs, obviously at A4, you used to have PD rights to go from A4 to A1. And then they said, well, actually there's they protected that local asset. So well, if there isn't a pub within 500 meters of that space, of that place, then you can't convert it without going through additional hurdles. And this is very akin to that. They sort of then moved that up into a next level up, saying it's then generally protected in a sort of very much that protection policy around it. But it's kind of interesting that all of that got put in place, and that asset then isn't part of the new F2 community uses, which I think is kind of interesting. Really, it's like, why is that not part of it? It's kind of
that is an interesting point. Yes, and we certainly cut our teeth in all those regulations a couple of years ago. But expect these things to be finessed and fine-tuned, because to my interpretation of this is that these changes have been brought in off the back of the impact of the COVID pandemic, and they are always open to being further amended or tightened up when any unwanted impacts of these changes are starting to be felt. So, yes. But of course, there are lots of other levels of protection for pubs, such as local community assets and the requirement to offer the pub for sale to the local community before putting it on the open market. So there's lots of other levels and complications of protection for pubs.
Do you think that the old policy kind of protected pubs enough to not put them in class F2, basically?
I would imagine so. Either that or somebody's just missed it, which is not beyond the realms of possibility.
Fair enough.
Okay, so how have those permitted development rights changed as of the 1st of August? Essentially, they are still the same, Class G, M and O, but an additional requirement has been placed on Class M and O, which is that the submission of floor plans has to be made with the prior approval application. This is to protect or prevent what has been a well-publicised byproduct of the permitted development rights, which is that buildings could be converted with rooms with no natural light, because bizarrely the building regs don't require natural light to habitable rooms. They only require ventilation. So legitimately, the buildings could be legally converted with living rooms, bedrooms without windows. And obviously, I'm sure most people would have seen some of the press coverage on those aspects. So they've covered that off now with an additional requirement under the prior approval application to lodge floor plans, which can then be assessed by the planning authority. So if we then move on to the new rights that have been introduced. So there are other rights that have been introduced which don't apply to commercial buildings, but we're focusing here purely on those that apply to commercial uses. So there's a new Class A introduced, which allows for an additional 2 stories of residential accommodation on a purpose-built residential block. There are a couple of qualifications to this. The first, that the flats must have been constructed between 1948 and 2018. You cannot apply this permitted development to buildings that have already exercised their permitted development rights under Class O or M or N. So in other words, you can't add 2 floors to a building that's already been converted. Additionally, you can't create HMOs under this regulation. It has to be C3 apartments or residential accommodation. Usual exclusions, which apply to most of these regs, is exclusion of Article 2.3 land, which includes conservation areas, and that's one that often catches people out. These permitted development rights do not apply in conservation areas, don't apply to listed buildings, don't apply in SSSIs, which is areas of scientific interest. And then a new one that's been introduced to cover off these new regs is scheduled ancient monuments, safety hazard areas, military explosive areas, or within 3 kilometres of an aerodrome. And I guess, Paul, you'll probably pick up on that. And one of the benefits that Nimbus can offer is looking at these opportunities in relation to their environment and what's around them.
Yeah, totally.
There are more. Unfortunately, this slide wasn't big enough for one of the exclusions and qualifications. I advise everybody to look at the legislative document and seek further guidance, but we'll come on to how you can do it. You can seek further advice on that.
Yeah, certainly.
Again, prior approval is required.
So in effect, you're submitting a sort of a less formal planning application. In effect, you're putting in plans, you're putting in elevations and that sort of stuff as part of that planning application, presumably.
Yeah, there are certain requirements of the prior approval exercise, and the requirements have been extended. So it is much more like a planning application now, to be honest. Although the prior approval process requires a local planning authority to determine the application within 56 days, mm-hmm. Which is about 8 weeks, or you have to, or you can then apply for deemed approval or request deemed approval. But what normally happens in the event is that if it gets to the 56th day, they'll find some technical reason to ask you to withdraw the application and resubmit.
Right.
And it can be very, very obscure. But anyway, that's there's a slide on exactly what that involves a bit later on.
Brilliant. Yeah.
The next class that's been introduced is Class AA, which allows additional 2 stories of residential accommodation on detached buildings, which are currently in commercial or mixed use categories. So whereas Class A is specifically for existing residential buildings, Class AA introduces the same right, but to commercial or mixed use buildings. Again, the qualifications are similar to Class A, but there are additional obligations not to exceed 30 meters in height, but also not to exceed more than 7 meters above surrounding roofs. The definition of surrounding roofs is one that I expect a lot of wrangling over with planning authorities as to exactly what that definition means. And with all these things, it probably will have to be tested by the first approaches that are going to be made under these regs to find out what that definition really extends to. Again, the building, the date stamped 1948 to 2018 for the existing building. You can't create HMOs, and that's HMOs either in the sui generis categories in less than 6 bedrooms, or under C4 category, which is 6 bedrooms or more in the HMO building. Again, look at the documents, because there's a lot of further qualifications that apply. Again, I will keep saying it because it really is the key to exercising these rights is the prior approval process.
And presumably, Dan, you can do pre-apps before your prior approval anyway, so you can go and get the council's opinion as to whether it applies to this particular building. So you can hit the kind of headlines off the back of this, check.
Yep.
It's all okay. Submit a pre-app, whack a quick letter in saying, does it apply to this building or not? And the council come back, say yes or no.
Yes, you can. Pre-apps, the caveat on pre-apps, of course, is that it's non-binding advice from an individual officer. You can have a successful or a positive outcome from a pre-app, lodge your application, and find that the local planning authority have done an about face, or some recent case has occurred which adjusts the advice they've already given. Yeah. So it's a real pre-application submissions are a real minefield, and to be used, to my mind, to be used sparingly.
Can I just?
Yeah.
If I just can come in on that one, I would not do a pre-app on a PD application. It's different if you're doing a planning application. The reason I say that is because Dan is absolutely correct in that there is a massive checklist of things that you have to go through before something is eligible for your PD rights. So the government have kind of increased the range of properties you can do stuff to, but they've also increased the checklist of stuff that you have to comply with. And that's the key word. There's a checklist. Mm-hmm. So whereas with planning applications, the checklist is very loose and is open to interpretation and opinion. And if you have a good planning consultant who goes through that checklist and gathers evidence to confirm, because a lot of these things where if you just ask them in a pre-app, is it this or whatever, or is the building constructed in this year, or, they will just make some broad brush assumptions. Mm-hmm. But your planning consultant will gather evidence to prove that each checklist point you adhere to, whereas they may not be privy to all those evidences. Things like existing uses, the continuous usage for a certain period, they might not be privy to that evidence. So I would argue that I would do the PD or prior approval application with the help of a planning consultant who has gathered all the evidence on each checklist point for the submission.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I would reinforce that.
I don't know what you
and
think
it's probably,
of that.
I don't know. I think the system, the planning system generally is the application process is much more being now a planning consultant led exercise, because there are no simple applications anymore, and the planning consultancy role has risen to the surface as a lead consultant in the pre-planning stages of work. It's probably a good time to point out we have an in-house planning consultant. So you can rest assured that these slides have been sense checked before they were issued. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And a good planning consultant will very often make a difference. It's two sides. Firstly, your success at committee or at local planning level, but also to ensure that you have a very robust case if any sort of appeal is required, whether it be on PD rights or others. So yes, absolutely, I agree with that.
Great.
The next PD rights been introduced is Class AB, which extends Class AA, which was specific to detached buildings in commercial use, to semi-detached or terraces of buildings in commercial use. Specifically, the qualifications are adjusted to allow or to limit the PD rights on single-story buildings. So you can only add an additional single story to an existing single-story terrace of shops. If it's already 2 stories or more, then you can add 2 further stories. There's a maximum height of 18 metres for the completed development, but again, the 7 metres over adjoining roofs is applied. Time stamped as the other PD rights are, no HMOs, and again, as Ranjan's pointed out, a long checklist which you need to consult somebody like me, or talk to or look through the legislative document yourself. Again, prior approval required. So effectively, all they're doing, they're building more, accessing more types of buildings with the PD rights, but at the same time ratcheting back how the PD rights can be applied to those subject buildings. That comes into force on the 31st of August 2020. That should be 2020, not 2002. Okay. The final new PD applicable to commercial buildings is ZA, which is offices B1 to C3 residential. Now this is interesting because this right actually allows for the demolition of a single purpose built detached block of flats or single detached building with B1 use class, and its replacement with a single purpose residential unit. B1 does actually, for this case, B1 includes offices and light industrial. Again, the qualifications are extensive, and there is a limit on the footprint of the existing building. So this footprint mustn't exceed 1,000 square meters, and it must be an entire building demolition, not partial demolition or one from a number of buildings. Again, you can go to the existing number of floors that the building has, and then add an additional 2, provided the 7 meters around above the adjoining buildings isn't exceeded. The exclusions are, as before, safety hazard areas, military exposure sites, aerodromes. Interestingly, the building must have been vacated for a minimum of 6 months prior to application, so you can't make a prior approval application on under ZA class on a building that's currently occupied or income generating, unfortunately. Again, the checklist is extensive.
You could presumably leave it empty for 6 months, then it qualifies, and then you submit your
You can do that, yes. Yeah, absolutely. And again, yeah, prior approval required. Interesting one, that. I think it's a viability conundrum, that one, I think. But we can, Ranjan has some thoughts on that, but we can talk about that.
I think I wanted to get your view on this, Dan. With some of the knockdown rights and also the additional floor rights, there seems to be a bit of a throwback to planning permission, which is that the planners seem to have an ultimate get out of jail card in having a view as to the aesthetic appearance of the finished building. And that is ambiguity, which I hate. I hope, I mean, PD for me has to bring certainty. I tick off the checklist and I can do it. I don't care what your opinion is on the look and feel of the building. And that one phrase scares the shit out of me. What do you think? Am I overly concerned or what?
No, I don't think you are. Under existing Class O, I mean, it's an interesting one because under existing Class O, the any material change of appearance or external alterations to the building requires a planning consent. So you can get your prior approval for the conversion, but if you wish to make external alterations to the building, you have to lodge a separate planning application. So there's always been a level of control over that. But I think this really comes onto a sort of a larger issue here, which is that local planning authorities are not fans of these permitted development rights, because for a couple of reasons. One is in the delivery of housing, developers are largely expected to provide a proportion of affordable housing and make contributions under 106 regulations. Under the PD rights, there is no affordable housing and there is no 106 contributions. So you can deliver residential units without any of the, which obviously place their consequential demands on local amenities, services, and so on and so forth, but without contributing to that infrastructure. The other reason they don't like it, well, there's also CIL, conversion of buildings. If you're not creating any additional floor space, they can't apply CIL. The community infrastructure levy and the cash contributions they generate don't apply to PD. And the final reason is, and there's probably more, is that very often the local plans will seek to protect employment use, especially in town centres. And these PD rights remove employment space from the delivery. Although things obviously are now changing, I mean, there's a sea change in how we view the working space, and whether large-scale offices are ever going to be required again is a moot point we could discuss ad nauseam after the last 6 months. But given that there is an inherent resistance to the use of PD rights, any leverage some local authorities can bring to bear to prevent them happening will be brought to bear. And I think that's again comes back to the point of why you should have a robust, potentially planning consultant-led strategy, so that you make sure that you've covered off all of these points, not to leave any leverage or room to manoeuvre for the local planning authorities to protect a depreciating asset, in my opinion, which is obviously large-scale office buildings.
I think that's absolutely correct. I think I just throw in one more reason why they hate it. Planners, you'll find that their job title, the name of their department is development control. It's not development enablement. I wish the councils, I'd go to someone in the development enablement department, but it's not, it's development control. So PD has been brought in to take that control out of planners because it's deemed that they aren't doing enough to enable development. Central government are enforcing this. So there's a whole bunch of politics and power play issues why they don't hate it. And I think a mistake that a lot of entrepreneurs make is they assume PD rights are here and the government wants it, the planners want it, everyone wants it. But they don't assume that you should always go into any PD project thinking that, yes, the government have brought in these rules, but the planners do not want you to do it. And you've got to do everything in terms of submitting your application to demonstrate beyond any doubt that you meet all the points in the checklist, so that you can prove beyond doubt that you have the right given to you by government to do what you want to do.
Agree.
Totally.
Okay.
Great.
Okay. Just to cover off the prior approval point.
Yeah.
So a private approval application is, it's not classed as a planning application, but it is a planning application process. You have to gather up all of your information, lodge your submissions, and the local planning authority are expected to expedite a decision within 56 days. Up until now, the aspects that have been covered by prior approval have been relatively limited. So the first four off this list in front of you now. So transport, contamination, flood risk, and noise are the four that have been applied under the current Part O of the regs. That's because of the extent of the new PD rights. That list has now been extended to include impact on air traffic and defence assets, the external appearance of the building. So Ranjan, you were quite right to be scared. Natural light, the issue of natural light and habitable rooms, which is probably a sensible one, to be honest. Impacts of the introduction or increase in a residential use of premises in an area on the carrying on of any trade, business or other use in that area. So if you're demolishing a commercial building in an office park, for instance, and replacing it with a residential block, then is there going to be a detrimental impact either on the occupants of the new building or the impact on the existing uses of the new use? Again, that's to my mind, that is an open-ended qualification, and there is a lot of wriggle room there. Again, it's going to have to be tested. Again, the submission of information with the prior approval will have to be extended to cover risk analysis and probably a series of environmental reports to demonstrate that there is no negative impact on either the proposed use or the existing uses around it. It also includes impact on amenity space of existing buildings and neighbouring ones, which that's probably there to cover off any increase in height under Class A, AA or AP, and what that might do to overshadowing and amenity of surrounding buildings. And also then that really extends then into, is there going to be an impact on a protected view identified in a direction in what's currently defined as protected vistas? I'm no expert on protected vistas. That would require again, sort of an extensive environmental, probably landscape visual impact assessment to demonstrate any increase in height doesn't have a detrimental impact on important views or protected vistas. So that process has gone from being what was relatively simple to what looks like it could be a relatively complicated procedure. And obviously, the acquisition of buildings with the intention to exercise PD rights, you will need a certain confidence that these aspects can be dealt with successfully before you commit to a purchase or submit your prior approval application. It's a minefield in essence.
But it's more kind of saying that it's kind of the presumption now is that you get your planning ticket rather than, you know, it's sort of bringing all this stuff into policy in effect, and you kind of just need to tick off these things. And, you know, is it right that you should be able to put those extra floors on top? Is it going to affect things around it or not? So, you know, we sort of talk a lot about that in Nimbus, you know, kind of that, do you really want to go and buy that office building in the office park, knock it down and build flats on it? It's like, well, it's not really the place you want to live, is it? You don't necessarily want to live, aren't you? And actually, I think it's saying you could do that if you wanted to. Really want to is kind of the sort of the commerciality around that sort of it doesn't really feel right anyway. So it's sort of saying, well, how do we define what feels right and what doesn't feel right? I think that's kind of what that's saying, isn't it? Really, it's kind of a presumption.
Sorry to interrupt. Yes, it is. I mean, context is everything, isn't it? Because the ability to change the use of these buildings and extend them clearly exists. Well, it does as of the 1st of August. The ability and the dynamic and the desire to make that decision and to do that scheme is dependent on a whole load of other issues: context, cost, marketability, comparable prices, all of these things. I guess you'll cover up in some of the Nimbus stuff. But you have to collect together all of the information and make a decision based on as much accurate and intelligent gathering of information as possible. And that's really what your upfront appraisal, which I'll come on to in some of the technical exercises actually, and I'll bemoan the lack of that homework that was done on schemes that we're involved with. It has to be right. It has to be right.
Totally. Amazing. Well, thank you for that, Dan. And then just, I suppose, there's a little bit more, isn't there, in terms of some of the planning changes moving towards
this. So,
thing?
Yeah, just to mention the issue of the government white paper in August 2020, which sets out a framework for redefining the planning systems it currently is. I've got it here. It's 120 pages. I condensed it into 5 bullet points. But effectively, the headline aspects of this document seek to actually limit the democratic process that's involved in the planning system currently. So currently, the planning system is made up of the local plans system, which allows for considerable public consultation and democratic process before the local plan is adopted. Then once that local plan is adopted, every single planning application and prior approval submission is subject to a further democratic process and potentially a committee-based democratic decision based on the merits of the scheme as seen by the local planning authority. The government has finally capitulated. That system is fraught with delays, difficulties, and is too open to political manoeuvrings, shall we call it. So their proposal is that the local plans process will stay the same, with potentially enhanced democratic process and consultation involved. But then post the local plans being adopted, the democratic process is limited, so that the intention would be that the new local plans will introduce a zoning approach and categorize areas in 3 categories: growth, renewal, or protected. And it will be, the intention is that should an area of a town, for instance, be allocated as an area of growth, there'll be a series of policies which need to apply in that area of growth, but there will be an automatic consent for schemes in that area of growth which comply with those policies. And this is then underpinned with 2 further aspects of the proposed system, which is to promote high quality sustainable design and improve infrastructure and connectivity, which again is tied back to sustainable aspects of redevelopment. And you'll see on my slide on the top right hand corner, those aren't flying pigs, they are actually just birds. But this is a wholesale rethink of the system. Currently, this document is in consultation. There is no commitment to a timescale or implementation. But as a series of headlines, it is the biggest shake-up in the system in my professional career, 25 years. So there's a lot that's positive about it, but obviously it's all caveated with this level of change will have to be enshrined in law. So there's a significant process to go through.
So just so I'm kind of clear then, so in effect, the local plan, the new local plans that they're sort of working on at the moment is saying, this patch here is resi, this is commercial, this is blah, blah, blah. There's your kind of your zone. And actually within those, we're then saying this bit's for growth, that bit's for renewal, that bit's protected, so you don't touch it in effect. So then you can see exactly where within the areas you can do stuff and where you can't do stuff in effect.
That's the aspiration, yeah.
Subject to high quality, sustainable design and improving infrastructure and connectivity. That's the plan.
Yeah, it's like a 3-tiered approach. So it's the sort of zoning is my term because I couldn't think of a better word for it. But it's that demarcation of those 3 key areas, and your sustainable design and infrastructure and connectivity are the 3 threads that are running through this white paper document.
But there's no kind of timescale as to when this might come in, or kind of how this is the plan now. It's kind of what they're working on, and this will come in at some point.
Yeah, it's currently in consultation. I believe the consultation period finishes in November, but that's just on the white paper. I'm not a legislative expert, but the processes that we'll then have to go through will be lengthy, I suspect.
Yeah, more to go. Yeah, cool. Great, amazing. Well, thank you for that, Dan. That's really, really interesting. I suppose, Ranjan, perhaps if we could perhaps move to you then, sort of in terms of these policies, where do you see those opportunities then? I think you've got a few slides you can.
Yes, I've got some slides, and let me just get my screen up. What I'm kind of going to do is focus on opportunities as I see them for the smaller developer or investor, the sort of person that may have started off with a few buy-to-lets, done a few simpler type of projects and that kind of stuff. Because a lot of the knock down and rebuild, hang on, I'm having a bit of difficulty.
Let's start the slideshow without doing that.
Again, start the
slideshow in the top bit.
Just went. A lot of the PD that's been announced is so far is stuff that will be great for larger developers. It takes quite a lot of.
There we are.
That's it. Okay, you've got to be at quite a stage in your journey to think about some of these propositions, which are sort of knock down and rebuild and adding extra floors to buildings and all of that, because there's still a lot of uncertainty in the PD that's being granted. One of the stats I just want to share with people is that 40 years ago, 30% of all dwellings, new dwellings were supplied by small developers. Now that's come down to 12% of new dwellings that are supplied by smaller developers. And one of the reasons of that is because of the planning uncertainty creates financing uncertainty. And where there's financing uncertainty, the smaller developer simply can't play. The other thing that's here to stay is that we've got plenty of commercial buildings where larger developers ain't interested. We can all picture, some large factory or some 25,000 square foot office that's become defunct. And I mean, we can all understand how a larger developer, a big established builder, would be interested in repurposing those sort of buildings. But those big developers and players ain't interested in the smaller stuff. Take, for example, a betting shop on a secondary parade where you can get a couple of flats above and maybe one in the back. A large developer ain't interested. It's too small beer for them. But it's a very interesting project for the smaller, clued up developer. And I guess what I'm going to do is kind of focus a lot more on those sort of projects with a few examples, if that's okay. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, sounds great. Let's crack on, yeah.
So I'm not going to do the sort of rules and regs kind of stuff. I'm going to do some of the entrepreneurial aspects of implementing some of this.
Yeah.
I'm going to skip over some of my introductory slides because you've already introduced me sort of quite well. I've been doing this for 30 years. I did my first commercial to resi conversion back in 2006 under planning permission. And then when it became PD in 2013, it became a lot sort of easier. I'd already learned quite a lot beforehand doing it the hard way. You mentioned Property Elevator, got a lot on YouTube. I've got a lot of commercial property vids on YouTube. We've got about 24,000 subscribers. So just search me out on YouTube and subscribe. There's tons, some of the stuff that I'll be talking about, I've got video case studies on the YouTube channel. So do check those out before and after. So I do residential property, HMOs, all of that sort of stuff. But we have a sizable commercial portfolio. I've been doing commercial property since 2001. We also have a serviced office business as well. So the way I've come into all these PD rights is from an entrepreneur. Over the last couple of months, we've really identified 15,000 square foot of space that we can either repurpose or create within our existing commercial portfolio under the rules that are here. So I've been first of all looking at how we can sweat the existing assets better, because of course if you already own the land and you can add more space, that is going to give you a far bigger return than necessarily going out and picking up another project. So we've been looking at the new rules and how that affects the existing portfolio quite a bit. What I wanted to quickly touch on was where we are and why the next couple of years are going to be very, very valuable. Because we're in a recession, and it's a very funny recession because it's as though the government have just put in so much Red Bull into the economy. We're all on a bit of a high, and the effects of the recession haven't really hit, but they will hit next year, and it is big. And in comparison to other recessions, it's quite a massive fall in GDP. We're looking at 20% when you look at, and that's only because the government have put so much stabilizers on it. So what we always see in recessions is the value of commercial properties fall faster than and more than residential properties, because commercial property only has a use for commerce. Residential property has an intrinsic use as people's homes. But if commerce is affected, if business is affected, if businesses are shutting down, if businesses are consolidating, there's less of a need for commercial property. There's supply demand is kind of means there's more supply than demand, and therefore prices fall. Rents fall as well. And you've got to remember, commercial property values are driven by the rental yield that that piece of real estate produces. So if there's less demand for it, and commercial rents fall, then the price of those properties fall. So what we always see in recession is that there's a greater fall in commercial values than there is in residential values. And we always see recessions always end with a boom. And when you get into a boom, residential properties always lead the charge, and commercial property prices always lag a few years behind in terms of recovery. And what we've also had is this, what I call crack economics. The government has put in £900 billion into the economy this time round. In 2009, they only did 300 billion. So it's already 3 times as much. And when you pump in so much money into the economy, it seems okay for now. But what happens is, as soon as the economy starts to get better, unemployment starts to fall, and the economy recovers in general, what you see is the effect of that quantitative easing in terms of bubbling up asset prices. We saw this exactly same thing play out last time round. 2009, the government did quantitative easing, £300 billion into the economy. When the economy started to recover around about 2014-ish, we started to see an asset bubble. They can print all the money they like, but they can't print property. And therefore stuff that's in finite supplies tends to start inflating. So what does that mean if you're a little bit switched on? Well, what it means is that recessions are always great fun to play around with property, and particularly commercial property, if you can repurpose those assets. This time round, 2020 to 2013, we have these recessionary climates that have done very well for savvy people in the past, but we have more PD rights than ever before that you can take advantage of. And the reason why that's beneficial is because if you can buy an unloved, unwanted, low value commercial piece of real estate, if you can use PD to convert as much of that space or all of it into residential usage, then what you do is you just transform that property or lift it from a path of low asset value and slow recovery, and you put it on a completely different track, a residential track, which is a higher asset value and will recover far faster and firmer as we come out of recession. And before, when I've done all this, I've done it the hard way in terms of picking up these commercial assets, applying for planning permission, going through sometimes 18 months of hard work and pain to secure some of these permissions, repurposing these to residential usages, and then you in a recession, you kind of by magic just uplift the value. This is what I found in recessionary times. You take a commercial asset, which is of low value, by converting it into residential value, you get an uplift in real time. It doesn't matter what the economy is doing. You can pretty much come out of a deal with pretty much near to all the money you've got invested in it, simply by repurposing it to a more profitable and more valuable use, without necessarily waiting for the market to sort of pick up. When it does, it just picks up and feeds in great. So Warren Buffett says this, and I've always lived by this: be fearful when others are greedy, be greedy when others are fearful. What does that mean in the real estate context? The red line shows the long-term average UK property price over time, and it always goes in an upward direction over time. And the blue line shows the property market cycles. And there are times where property prices are below the long-term average line, and there are times when property prices are above the long-term average line. Now, I've been investing in property since 1990, and I've had 2 great periods of below the long-term average line in investing. And if you can combine picking up distressed assets from motivated sellers at these times when you're below the long-term average line, and you can do something to them to add immediate value to that property, then you're onto a winner. What PD gives us is that ability to add immediate value to a distressed asset. And in any of these times, these green periods before, we have never had so much PD that's out there. So it is exciting times. During the last recession, this is one of the typical ones that we did, distressed. There was a fire damaged cost cutter on the corner, an abandoned double shop there. We've managed to get a Costa in there, Greg's in there, and all of this. In those days, and flats above, and it's all fully let, and changes the area. It does a lot to an area to take something that's unloved, fire damaged, an eyesore, and then to just bring something like this to the space is something good, and it also makes you money. But the opportunity to do these sort of deals is best at a recessionary time, because commercial real estate you can pick up per square foot at a price that you'll never get at any other time. And with the PD opportunities to repurpose to a higher value per square foot, it's a no-brainer. So what are you looking for? You're looking to buy stuff at a low value per square foot. You're looking to spend something on it. So if I can buy some space at £250 a square foot, and I spend £100, £110 on converting that into residential space, and it's worth £550 a square foot done up, it doesn't take a rocket scientist or any detailed spreadsheet to tell that that is a goer. And it's really simply about finding these deals, structuring them so you don't put in much of your own money, and being in and out of these deals as soon as possible so that you can do as more as you can in a recession while this is a golden time. And I quite favor these quick in and out deals, because rather than the long haul ones, because I think we've got about 3-4 year window of opportunity. And if you spend a year and a half in planning for something on a complicated scheme, you could do 3 or 4 quick shop and uppers in that time period, and probably achieve a sort of better return. Now, one of my underlying principles when I invest in commercial real estate is that I'm always looking at properties where they're usually tenanted, sometimes they're empty, but I'm always looking for properties where there's demand, there's occupier demand among commercial occupiers for that piece of real estate. And I'm also looking for alternative uses. If the tenant were to leave and I can't find another occupier, I want that building to be easily repurposed. So I'm in a better position were the tenant to up and leave. Now, these 2 principles have actually meant that our commercial portfolio during coronavirus has held up very, very well. We have had some tenants, particularly some big companies, in fact, who have kind of pleaded poverty, even though their balance sheet is massive compared to ours. Because a lot of these big companies with renting commercial properties have been trying to go back to their landlords and say, hey, can you basically give us a discount off the rent? Because our properties were bought because they could be repurposed, we've basically been very strong back to them and said, no, if you don't want it, go. Because the property can be repurposed. We can do other things with it. So our position is strong. The commercial property landlords who are weak are people like the Into shopping center chain that have just gone bust. How do you repurpose Into? It's virtually impossible without locking the whole thing down. So as a commercial landlord, they're in a weak position. If they can't re-let the place and they have no alternative use for it, then if the tenant wants a reduction, they have no choice but to accept. And I think those stories are leading the narrative of what you read in the newspapers about commercial property. People that have bought commercial property where it can be repurposed. If the existing occupier doesn't want it, fine. You can repurpose it through PD. It's easily repurposable. Those landlords have done very, very well through sort of coronavirus and the like.
And of course, Ranjan, those kind of those tools that you've got at the moment now with the new Class E make that even easier. So, those retail units you buy, the doctor's surgeries, all that kind of stuff, the bookmakers, all this kind of stuff can now sort of almost seemingly effortlessly kind of move through Class E without a change of use anymore. Where before you'd be limited, you can't wait.
Class E is massive for commercial landlords, because one of the biggest banes for commercial landlords has been that you've got an A1 shop, say it's a newsagent, and some tenant wants to open up a cafe in there or wants to set up a estate agent or whatever. They can't. They have to actually go through planning permission to affect, and that can take months. So it's a big deterrent to them taking that property. Now, if I've got an old GP practice and I want to put a Tesco Metro in there, they like the car park and all of that, I can do that because it's all under Class E from September the 1st. Yeah. Very, very powerful. But people have got to remember, there are a couple of things about Class E. You can move things around within that new class. Absolutely great. I've got a YouTube vid on that, which is this one, Class E and what it means for property investors. But what you can't do is take a doctor's surgery, turn it into an office, and then do office to resi on it. So it's
not yet anyway.
You can't do that. What they haven't announced, and this is what I'm getting onto now, they haven't announced yet is what PD rights are applicable to all of Class E. Mm. So when they do, I believe we will, if we go by the existing direction of travel, and I'll be interested to know Dan's view on this, with the checklist and there's more ifs and buts to it, I am scared that when the existing PD rights, basically they last until 31st of July next year. So when those the existing Class O, Class G, Class M, when they are sort of retired and they're replaced by the new PD to Class E, I think we may lose a couple of things. And the things I fear we may lose is deemed consent. I love the idea of shoving in an office to resi conversion application, and if the council can't pull their finger out in 56 days, I've got it. I really fear we lose that. I'm exceptionally worried about minimum size, minimum dwelling size. Now that's not because I want to build rabbit hutches. The thing is, in London, for example, you're affected by the London plan. So typically, if you want to build a flat, it has to be 50 square meters. Now, if you think about a shop and uppers, under Class G permitted development rights, you can take the upper parts of an A1, A2 shop and make it into 2 flats. If it's 2 floors, you can make it into 2 flats. Now, if you actually think about most of the shop and uppers that are out there, very few of them have 50 square meters on 1 floor. And it's uneconomic to make flats over split floors because of the soundproofing, fireproofing, and all of that. It's cleaner if you can have one floor per one flat. So that's why the no minimum size thing that we have at the moment is very, very powerful. Because if you've got a shop with 2 uppers and it's A1, it's very simple, 1 floor per flat. And the economic viability of doing the conversion is okay. We've also got to remember that just because you can do PD, it doesn't mean it makes sense to you. And what I think a lot of people forget is that whether or not it's economically viable depends on the value of the end product. In London, practically any PD is viable. If I've got an office building and it's riddled with asbestos, it would be worth me spending 200 grand to get rid of it, because the end value of the land is so high that it's worth it. But if that office building is in Doncaster, it's 1950s built, it's riddled with asbestos, it's got glass single glazing at the front, which I've got to totally reclad and all of that, my cost of conversion is going to be high, and the end value of the flats that I'm going to create is going to be relatively low. It may not actually be viable. So the existing rules that we have allow more PD to be done in more areas because they don't have these minimum size considerations, which I think is very, very powerful when you're doing shops and uppers. Dan, do you want to, I'd be interested to know what you think.
I think yeah, the control of minimum sizes of residential units is something that's gathering apace, and it has rolled out of London now, and more local authorities are writing into their local plans the requirement to meet the national space standards. So there is a movement to raise the bottom or instate a bottom bar of areas required for each, you know, a studio, 1 bed, 2 bed, 3 bed, etc., etc. Currently, the PD rights don't allow an authority to make a judgment based on the areas that the units, the proposed units are, only that they should have natural light. Yes, I think that is something that if they continue to extend and build on these PD rights, they will also at the same time continue to ratchet back the freedom that we have as development teams to actually exercise those rights. And I think the size of the units may well be one of them. And also your point on deemed consent, I tend to agree. I think if the process of prior approval is going to be more onerous and there's more consultations that have to be done to demonstrate the PD scheme complies with the requirements, then planning authorities will bleat until they are given more time to consider these submissions. So yes, I think deemed consent's at risk. But as I said before, in my experience, which is similar with full planning applications, if it gets to the point of determination and no extension has been agreed, because you can agree an extension with the local planning authority to the 56 days if you're close to a decision and it just requires a little bit more of a nudge. If you don't agree an extension of time and they have no other recourse, they'll find some obscure technical reason or no reason at all just to demand that you withdraw it. It's a constant. It's a function of how planning authorities are funded. They're funded on the basis of determining applications within set periods of time, and a withdrawal is one of the definitions of determined. So withdrawal within 56 days is a determination within 56 days, and therefore ticks a box for them. So all these things you have to be aware of. And I think, yeah, but I do agree with you, Ranjan. I think there will be, come July next year, there will be a significant additional layer of bureaucracy that's attached to the application of these rights.
Absolutely. And I think I'm just going to sort of whiz through that one. I'm going to concentrate on this one, actually, because I'm probably running short of time. But I wanted to get a couple of points across, I think, is that I guess my view on PD is because I've been having a lot of fun with the PD that's currently on the table, and I've enjoyed the freedom that it's given us. And industrial to residential, you know, that ends. People assume that when PD comes, it's here forever, and it's not. What happens is that the existing rules that we have for Class O, Class G, Class M, I'll share with you some quick examples now. You have until 31st of July next year to get those apps in. And then when you get your prior approval, whatever, you have 3 years to start works. And by starting works, it's normally that what I found is the safest test is to demonstrate by way of having your first buildings inspector visit and sign off. And you do that within the 3 years of being given your consent. If you don't do that, it's gone forever. So a simple thing is like you may have to knock down a wall and put in a steel. Just make sure you've knocked down that wall, put in the steel, had it inspected before the 3 years are up, and then you have forever to actually build out and implement the thing. So this is running out. This is last of the summer wine stuff. The doors are closing, and you're going to lose the right to do this if you don't get your skates on. And we're also entering a time where there are going to be more easy pickings on this because of the recessionary climate. I wanted to quickly touch on some of the Class M stuff, which is the classic flat in a back of a shop type of situation. I think the mistake people make with this one time and time again is they try to convert the whole of the retail unit into residential use. I always advise people no, because invariably there's something in the local authority's plan. If there's something in the local authority's plan, that can trump PD. So normally there's words to the effect in the local plan that says, we will resist loss of retail units on this parade or in our borough or something like that. Now, they don't say loss of retail floor space. So as long as you retain the shop at the front and you make the flat at the rear, then you don't do anything against that policy and they can't stop it. So the other thing is this, and I just wanted to kind of explain from an entrepreneur's point of view, why converting the rear of a shop is such a great thing to do. Now, it's the way commercial property shops are valued, and it's the way rents work on commercial property. Now, when you have a shop, the rent per square foot at the front of the shop is more than the rent per square foot at the back. A shop, a retail unit, is divided into zones for rental value. So as you come in off the street, the first third of the shop is zone A. The second third is zone B, and at the back is zone C. Now, if your rent for zone A is, say, £60 a square foot, as you go deeper into the shop, the middle third will be half of zone B per square foot. So you're looking at £30 a square foot. And the back, where typically you'll have ancillary storage, is half of zones B. The reason for that is because the highest utility in a shop is at the front. That's where most customers end up. As you go further back, it tends to be storage space, and therefore it's less valuable. It commands less rental value. Now, that, of course, is complete nonsense for residential property. If you've got a flat in Kensington, you know, the square footage in the loo is worth the same as in the airing cupboard, as in the lounge, as in the kitchen. It's rent per square foot. It doesn't matter whether it's at the front, back, sideways, it's rent per square foot. And here's the other thing that I find. Zone A rents per square foot in any area are roughly the same as residential rents per square foot in any area. So if you take a long, deep shop and you convert the rear of it into a flat, what you've done is you've made the whole of that square footage of space into the equivalent of zone A income rentable value, which of course gets you a extra cash flow, but obviously residential values are valued on bricks and mortar basis. So it gets you a higher uplift in capital value. Typically, when we do these sort of schemes, you're looking at commercial values per square foot at being a third of their residential equivalent. And provided it doesn't cost you too much to convert from commercial to residential, you're onto a winner. The video thumbnail I've got is a before and after with Kieran. She did a project like this. She founded an auction. We actually funded the project. She came on various workshops that I've done. She made a flat at the back of a shop in Ealing. And that's pretty much done now. I mean, despite COVID, she's actually sold the shop and the flat behind, and that's turned a profit of 200 grand after all costs. It's taken a year, and that's because of COVID. She would have been out in 6-7 months had we not had this, this crisis. Now, we have to do, now as Dan has mentioned, we have to do floor plans. Before, you didn't have to do so much internal floor plans of the units that you want to make. My advice is to put in a planning application to knock in some windows and doors beforehand, because particularly at ground floor level, they are relatively uncontroversial. I've never ever had ground floor knocking in a couple of windows and doors rejected as a planning app. Then you put in the sort of PD. With flats at the back of a shop, sometimes there's access from the rear, like a mews road or a side passage or whatever. Sometimes you have to knock access to the flat from the front of the shop. So you have to make an additional doorway in the shop front. So what we usually do with those is apply for those under planning permission, get those in beforehand so that the alterations are already consented before putting in the PD sort of for the rest. And then it's very, very difficult for anyone to kind of sort of object to all of this. I mean, my assumption in all of this is that planning departments don't like me and they don't like what I do. So I've just got to make slam dunk certain that I can get what I want to do because I'm following all the rules and I can demonstrate that. That's really kind of the zone sort of in which I operate. So this, and Class M rights are rather interesting in that you can actually do more than one flat at the back of a shop. What normally restricts you is light and access. So there are some shops which are double fronted and the like. Under Class M, if you've got light and access, you can make more than one. The other interesting thing is, which a lot of people miss, I think, is the conservation areas. Like, for example, Class M, which is a flat behind a shop, you can't do in a conservation area, but you can do Class G. Class G is 2 flats above a retail unit. So that may or may not be worthwhile depending on sort of your position. But if you're buying a whole freehold, to me, it makes sense to pick one up which is not in a conservation area so that you can benefit from both Class G and Class M. I'm going to whiz through a lot of stuff because I'm conscious on time. I've got a 90-minute version of implementing your PD rights to repurpose buildings, which I'm doing on Sunday as a webinar, a live webinar. So it's free. Just book on property-workshop.com.
Anyway, we'll put the link to that in the chat in a moment. Actually, so if people want to kind of look at more detail around some of this stuff with Ranjan, we can do that. There's a follow-up webinar. That's Sunday night, you say, Ranjan?
Sunday night, yeah, 7.
Yeah, we'll pop a chat in a moment.
And I just wanted to share I guess I'm running out of time. Have I got time for just one case study?
You've got a minute.
Okay. Now, the power of all of this stuff is combining PD rights, looking for the ambiguities, looking for the anomalies, looking for the interpretations where you can push things a little bit and combining them on, because everyone knows the simple stuff, but it's combining them all together. So this is Satnam's deal. He attended my May workshop because I do some training on this sort of subject. He was one of the stars of that session. He found this at the last Allsop commercial sale. And that's important because this is in plain sight. Everyone, auction catalog, everyone could have seen this deal. It's a retail unit in Henley. And the interesting thing about this unit is that it fronts onto the road that you see, but the rear of the shop fronts onto another road, which also has shops on it. So what's the angle with a long, deep shop that has an entrance at both ends? Well, the angle here is to subdivide that shop in two. So you have two retail units. Then, once you have two retail units, you have Class G rights to build two flats above. You have those rights for two shops. So above this unit, he's building 4 flats under planning permission. So firstly, by subdividing the shops both work because they both have street access, and then implementing the Class G right. Now, this only works because the actual space above this retail unit, because a lot of retail units are extended on the ground floor, but the upper parts aren't that deep. This works because the upper parts are as deep as the shop below, so it works a treat. Now, a lot of people wouldn't have actually seen that particular angle, and a lot of the opportunities come from combining PD rights and using the best ones that are applicable to a particular site. Because those are the opportunities that not all people see.
Yeah, so you can split retail units side by side, you can split them front to back. Yes, front to back, you're creating 2 lots of zone A off the back and zone off the front, which is going to push those values up, obviously. Yes,
exactly. And so I know you're sort of wrapping me up. A lot more in my webinar on Sunday, but I think it is, I can't emphasize more to people that we have some fantastic PD rights already on the table. They end 31st of July next year. And there are more and more properties you can buy where you can apply those PD rights because of the recession. You'll find more commercial properties that are available through estate agents, through direct-to-vendor marketing, and also through auctions, where you'll be able to make use of these last of the summer wine opportunities.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. Great. So perhaps, Dan, if we can move on to the next section then, just around some of the technical challenges. So some other schemes, and just from your point of view, kind of construction-wise, some of the challenges that are around that. Do you want to just share your screen? Ranjan, if I get you just to unshare your screen, if that's okay, and then that'll give Dan the right to take control and run us through some more bits, if that's okay.
Yeah, okay, 1 second. Not share screen.
So I just wanted to look at some of those some of the buildings that have been converted recently, and looking at kind of some of those technical challenges, how this thing actually works. One of the sort of challenges I always thought of about kind of airspace is how do you actually physically do it? And perhaps Dan, if you could run through some of that, that'd be really, really helpful, I think.
Yeah, no problem. So we're involved in and have been over the years quite a number of commercial to residential conversions, some which actually go back before the PD rights were introduced. So it was possible to do this even before the PD rights were introduced. So points to consider when you're first looking at these kind of schemes. I'm sure Ranjan would have some comments on these. You've looked at the PD rights and you feel that you can hit all of the check boxes required to apply those PD rights to your building. One of the first points that we get involved with is the viability aspects of the scheme. So when you're making an assessment of your building of, say, 50,000 square feet, you need to make a realistic judgment or get some advice on what the net to gross achievable areas of that building is. So are there sufficient fire escapes? Are you going to have to put in a load of additional circulation to allow the footprint to work? And is that going to take out of your lettable income producing space with non-lettable circulation, vertical flats, AOVs, so on and so forth? Again, it's really something that you've got to base and since you now have to lodge floor plans with your submission anyway, it makes a lot of sense to get your initial viability study, feasibility layouts carried out so you can see the outturn GDV of the scheme based on a realistic conversion scheme.
Yep.
The next one is that we talk about is structural integrity. So that's both of the existing buildings and what remedial works may have to be carried out to support the conversion, or the additional floors. And most importantly, if you're basing your appraisal on adding additional floors under the new PD rights, what's the capacity of the structure to take that additional load? An additional 2 floors of accommodation on a building, whether it be a frame building or load-bearing masonry, is significant. So are you going to have to invest in strengthening the existing structure to allow those additional floors to be added? Access to services, again, it's something that very often gets missed. Our infrastructure, power infrastructure, water, sewage, drainage systems are all under a fair degree of pressure at the moment. And any new development scheme is an opportunity for the service authorities who are, remember, outside of the control of the planning system and to a degree outside of the control of the building regulation system, to seek to upgrade their infrastructure at your expense. So are you likely to need an additional substation to support additional electrical loadings from the development? Have you worked that in both in terms of space on the site, but also in terms of the viability and the cost of installing that substation, because it will come at you, the developer's expense. Acoustic performance is something that's very interesting. The building regulations have been tightened up over recent years in the residential sector to increase the amenity within the flats by restricting sound transfer across the building. No commercial building will have been built to meet the requirements of residential acoustic performance. They're 2 very different things. So you need to factor in again the cost and the space requirements of adding acoustic performance to the existing structure, especially if it's a steel frame building, because the steel frame has to be completely isolated from the remaining structure. Fire performance and escape, everybody understands the impact or is aware of the impact of the Grenfell incident. Part B of the building regulations is currently being changed to reflect some of the recommendations of the reports that came out after Grenfell. It is a minefield at the moment. You have the existing fire regulations which are in place, and this is about fire escape and fire integrity as well. So this is about how well the building in its converted state resists the spread of fire, both in terms of the integrity of the structure and the surface spread of flame. So will flames spread across the external and internal surfaces of the building? So you've got the existing regs, the new regs which are due to come into force in November, but they haven't actually been issued yet formally. And then you have the requirements of warranties, funders, and building insurers. So the sort of schemes we get involved with, and I'll come on to a couple in a second, are constructed with development finance and are subject to a 10-year warranty provision. Because of the issues around Grenfell and fire performance, they're retrospectively looking at, warranty authorities are looking to protect their position, and building funders are looking to protect their investment on the basis of applying additional levels of requirements of fire performance above and beyond what the building regulations currently state. So if you're looking to do a development like this, you need to be aware of what the requirements will be of any funder or warranty provider, or if you're retaining the building, what your building insurance requirements will be later on. This impacts directly on us because as designers, as part of the design team, we have a responsibility to meet those regulations and under our appointment documents meet the additional requirements of funders and warranty providers. So it's something that you need to be aware of, and it has both a cost and potentially disastrous impact if you are converting to sell the building and then you find out that your building is unmarketable because you haven't met certain additional requirements of funders. Potential additional planning applications, we covered this really. PD rights and prior approval covers certain aspects of development, but there are operational development processes which may require additional planning applications, such as if you have to put a substation on the site, you need planning consent for that substation enclosure. Additional build cost, it's a question I get asked a lot. You're starting off with a building, therefore it must be cheaper to convert that building than to build a new build construction from scratch. Just doesn't work out that way. It is as expensive to convert a building successfully as it is to build a new building on a square foot by square foot basis, depending on the sort of building you're starting with. CIL, something somebody asked in the Q&A actually, which I've answered. The CIL doesn't apply on the space being converted, but if you're adding floors, CIL will apply to the additional floor space created.
Is that true under PD as well, Dan? Is that so? Under the new PD rights, adding 2 floors, you'd pay CIL on top of those. Do we know? Has that been released?
Yes, as I understand it, CIL will apply the additional floor space. In fact, I think yeah, it does. It will do.
Yeah,
but not on the converted space.
Yeah, of course.
So those are some of the initial point. If you're still interested in having a go, this is one of the schemes we've currently got live in Birmingham. So this is 2 office buildings, steel frame 1980s office buildings. It was actually the courts in Sheldon in Birmingham. That we're currently converting to 55 residential units. So, and we've probably hit 80% of the issues that I've just described we've experienced on this scheme. The challenges we faced is firstly, as a consultancy, we picked this job up after the PD rights had been, after the prior approval had been obtained, and the initial feasibilities had been carried out, and the developer had agreed the price with the vendor. When we interrogated the layouts upon which the feasibility had been carried out in the PD and the prior approval had been approved, they didn't work. They didn't work for Part B fire. They didn't work for acoustic performance. So we had to rework the scheme and introduce all of the additional elements required for those parts of the building regulations, which had an impact on the net to gross, which had an impact on the GDV, and had an impact on build cost. So it's a live example of what potentially can happen. So the images at the bottom of the screen, you can see the before and the proposed after. I'll let Ranjan expand on his fear of aesthetic judgments being placed on these schemes. But we've had no problem agreeing these elevational changes with Birmingham City Council as a planning authority, and that's been subject to a separate planning application.
Yeah, cool.
The other issue we've had with this is it's a steel frame building, so we've had significant issues in creating the acoustic separation required between the units, and that has extended into the fire regulations and how the building regs are currently interpreted. Because the building regs are actually, the regulations themselves form only a part of the document. Large parts of the building regs are just examples of how you can comply with the regulations. And up until this year and the impact, the fallout from Grenfell, you have been able to negotiate various methods of meeting the Part B fire with the Building Control Authority, which meets the criteria, the performance criteria, but doesn't necessarily look like the examples in the building regs. In this case, everybody has put the shutters down and won't negotiate, and we have retrospectively had to introduce, in this case, roof space separation, which is currently an open roof void. We've had to compartment the roof space, the roof void along the party walls of the flats to create 1 hour fire compartmentation all the way up to the roof. Up until this point, that hasn't been necessary. So again, that's had an impact on cost and time, but in order to get the building signed off for building regulations and to the satisfaction of the specialist fire consultant, this work has had to be carried out. And further on from that, the introduction of what's a document called the EWS1, which is a performance specification for for buildings. It's essentially it's a tick box checklist for funders and mortgage companies for buildings conversions and new build buildings about how they should perform under fire circumstances. Again, that is in excess of what is required of the building regulations. It brings the requirements of buildings that are over 18 metres. It brings the requirements for those buildings down to buildings effectively over 3 floors. So again, we've had to go back into the detailing and re-specify external materials that have an improved surface spread of flame for what is only a 3 and 4 story building. Again, cost implications, time implications. All of these things have come out in the process. And this building went into contract as COVID hit, primarily because the funders, the client had to get his scheme development funding live because the funders were pulling development funding from the market left, right, and centre. So this went into contract quickly. No time, not enough pre-development design time. So we're now having to retrospectively deal with these issues as they come along. But again, it's the importance of working with an experienced and proactive design team so that you can hit these problems when they occur and solve them before they cause you a significant difficulty.
Yeah, totally. One of the things we sort of talk about a lot on Nimbus is exactly that, is making sure you've got the right team behind you to make sure that this sort of stuff is seen at the start. It's like you're saying, kind of somebody's doing the feasibility stuff up front, is then not continuing on through the process. Yeah. Then the architect and the design team picking it up downstream, then has all those problems to try and fix, haven't been really thought through, just kind of got a planning ticket on it and kind of left all that detailed delivery, kind of handed that problem over. That then needs unpicking and unraveling. If you can keep that same team through that journey, then that kind of handover mess doesn't appear, does it? So kind of really important.
It doesn't. It doesn't. And I think that there is, again, this comes back to the point that Ranjan made earlier, actually, that the profession, not just architects, all design professionals, are being devolved into a series of specialisms. And now you get consultants that specialize in the pre-planning work, and you get consultants that, well, not many, which we are actually one, who specialize in the post-development, the post-planning phases. And that does cause a difficulty, and it causes frustration and cost where otherwise it could have been avoided. Yeah, by appointing us earlier, not keeping the original team on, my ad. So that's, as I say, that's due for completion. The show flats are supposed to be open at the end of September. The jury's out on that one. These are constructed under design and build contracts. So we're novated to working for the contractor in this case. So we don't have a contractual responsibility to run the schemes. We're a design support.
Fabulous. I'm just going to see there, Dan, that's okay. So I think what I'd like to do, Dan's got one more slide to run through another scheme, but I think just given where the time is at the moment, we sort of ought to just kind of move on, if that's okay. So sorry to cut across like that, Dan, but I suppose just moving on, how can we all help? I suppose first things, perhaps if we just sort of talk about what Nimbus are up to at the moment, sort of with these changes, obviously there's a number of key things that need to be checked before these schemes can come forward. So we need to be checking things like whether buildings are listed and all that kind of stuff. That I've already called it down. Was it Zone 2 or something? The types of buildings that these things can apply to and can't apply to. The restrictions around listed buildings and conservation areas and that sort of stuff.
Yes, and currently it's the triple SSIs, conservation areas, proximity of listed buildings. And now increasingly, what the impact on the amenity of surrounding buildings and the heights and massing of surrounding buildings as well. So there's a lot of material that has to be gathered from systems like yours. Yeah,
cool. So what we've been up to over at Nimbus is a kind of couple of things really. So the first thing we've done is we've launched this thing called Elite Plus, and what that's doing is it's building in off the back of these new permitted development rights a number of things that we call strategies in essence. So what those do is they use our site finding service. We've got a whole bunch of data scientists and all this kind of stuff that that in effect have been very used to crunching data and numbers to work out where do these things work and where do they not work. And so we've built these changes to the new planning legislation into these strategies. And we're launching 6 of those as we speak. Those strategies in effect are new things that come into the overlay section of Nimbus that explain, first off, we provide support around that as well. So what are the strategies, what's the policy that relates to these things, what opportunities does that create? And then here's a button in Nimbus that just highlights those particular buildings on the map. For those of you that saw it last month, we did the first one of these strategies. It's been very well received actually. And the sort of the way they work is like this. This is the low value uppers one. So this is very much akin to the kind of stuff that Ranjan was talking about a moment ago. And this is what this is doing is it's highlighting on the map buildings that are in their nature retail on the ground floor, but have space above them that are in again commercial use as part of those first floors where those PD rights apply, and you can convert those. Some examples of that, if we sort of zoom in, for example, there's a building here that's been highlighted, and I just actually put that into my workflow. And what this overlay does is it says that there's 1,700 square feet above ground floor, so big enough for the minimum size requirements. There's 500 square feet for each of those 2 flats that can go into there. It's got a predicted price to buy and convert of 250 quid a foot. And actually the residential values in that area are 350 a foot. So there's 100 quid margin on 1,500 square feet, up so there's 150 grand's worth of profit in that building. And in essence, what the system does is it's kind of calculating those things in the background, working out where those restrictions do and don't apply, and then removing those buildings out where they don't. So in effect, it's hitting the headlines for you first to make sure the buildings that you're looking at work. We've got 6 of these being launched this month. And actually those 6 different opportunities that are there, they're kind of the PD rights around commercial to residential conversions. Do you knock them down and put 2 stories on top? The additional floors above flats, some of the residential opportunities that we haven't covered today, because today's about commercial, but there's upper floor conversions that we've talked about, undervalued commercial buildings in residential areas where those conversions naturally apply. Some of those then are forming part of those strategies that we're launching as we speak. I'm just going to jump back into my my slides here so we can move forward. So this is really kind of dwelling on one of those 8 ways to find land that Nimbus Maps Elite offers you, and really that permitted development rights piece of it, and kind of the new strategies that are coming in to sort all of that out in effect. So there are 6. Of those 6, as I say, a combination of commercial to residential conversion, as has been the topic of today's webinar, but also some of those residential, out and out residential, where can I find blocks of flats where I can put 2 floors on top of those as well. And kind of the general policies that also apply in terms of back gardens, corner plots. We've got a webinar tomorrow actually, where we've managed to persuade Dan to come back and join us for that. Where we're going to be showing what those 6 strategies are. We're going to talk about the policies that create the opportunities for these new development rights, these new buildings that we convert, new buildings we can extend, put more floors on and drive value into those sites. That's going to be tomorrow at 1 o'clock. So we'll have sort of a 2-hour session there. If anybody would like to join us with that, I'm going to pop the link for that into the chat in a moment. In the meantime, Dan, you were saying that if people have got kind of issues themselves and they want to talk to you about certain buildings, you're okay for them to get in touch with and do a call with you?
Yeah, by all means. We'll do a half-hour pre-consultation to anyone who wants to discuss any particular project-related issues, or wants to give some initial advice on a potential scheme. Fabulous.
So I'm just going to pop in the chat at the moment. As we said before, we've got the link to the webinar tomorrow if you want to see the strategies that are being released, kind of talk through what those strategies are, kind of why those are now things with policy. If you've got, so there's a link there to sign up to that. So you want to come see us tomorrow and sort of see what those strategies are and how you can kind of use technology to find those sorts of opportunities. And if you want to speak to Dan, we've put a link into the chat. So you've got email address there, studio@rickett.co.uk, the phone number, and then kind of the website for Dan there. And then Ranjan, we've just popped your let me just move across. This is your webinar for Sunday night, isn't it? I've just popped the link. people can go to www.property-workshop.com. Is that right? And they can sign up for the webinar there, can they? So you're just on mute at the moment. Ranjan, we've got you on mute at the moment.
Yep, it's 7 p.m. We go on for about 90 minutes. It's live, and it's really about the opportunities for the small developer, which many of them, which I feel, well, not feel, won't be around that long, and it's how to maximize that opportunity, and plenty of case studies as well.
Fabulous. Great. So we haven't really got time for a lot of questions, but we'll, perhaps people have got some questions, we'll pop them in, we'll just do a quick 5 minutes on those questions now. In the meantime, while you're doing that, I'm just going to launch a couple of polls just to see if anybody would like to take advantage of those. If you fill out the poll now and click, would you like to join the webinar with us tomorrow? That's at 1 o'clock tomorrow. If you click yes or no on that, on the first one of the poll that I've just launched. If anybody would like to follow up with Dan and Rickett Architects, that's the second one. If anybody would like to join the webinar on Sunday with Ranjan, again, that's the third one there. I'll give that a moment just for everybody to fill that out. As I say, if you could, for those of you who'd like to ask some questions, if you pop those into the Q&A, we've probably got some in the chat as well. I'm just going to check that. So we'll have a session where we just run through those in a moment. We just fill out the poll while that's happening. And what I will then also do is just kick off a second poll in a moment. So just give people a moment just to fill that out. I can see the questions are coming in. Guys, I don't know if you guys want to just open up the Q&A and just start to look at some of those questions, just start to pick out some of those if you've got anything that's particularly relevant. We'll sort of pick out perhaps just 2 or 3 if we can. So perhaps, Dan, if you could pick out perhaps 1, perhaps 2, Ranjan, perhaps the same.
Yeah.
While that's all coming in, that would be great. I'll give that poll just another 20 seconds, and then we'll end that. So if anybody wants any of this stuff from us, then click the buttons on there, and that'll make sure you're kind of on the list, and we'll send you all the stuff to get all that over to you. Fabulous. Okay, we'll call that to an end now. And then just finally, if people are interested in those the new premium strategies that we have launched, if they could let us know. I'm just going to launch another poll just around that, and then we'll get the guys to answer some questions while what's happening. So in effect, the first one being the new PD rights for commercial buildings that can be rebuilt for residential with the new PD rights. That's what's very much been the focus of Dan's sort of discussion today. If you're interested in low value commercial buildings in residential areas that could be right for conversion, that's the second one for you. If you're interested in upper floor conversions, which includes that kind of shops with uppers, that PD right stuff that Ranjan's been talking about, that's the third one. If you're interested in blocks of flats that are eligible for stories on top of them under that new PD rights, that one for me is a really interesting one, because there's lots of freehold ground rent investments that are being held at very low values. And those leases then provide the rights to go for the landlord to put more stories on top. That also works with mixed use schemes, those kind of retail units on the ground floor. So for me, that's a really interesting one. We've got a couple of those in sort of our family portfolio we're going to be getting pretty excited about. Then that's the fourth one. Fifth one is the sort of back gardens, side gardens, low density residential plots. So in effect, where can we find that bungalow can knock down and build 3 houses on? That's the fifth one. If you're interested in that, fifth one's for you. And then the final one is then around those houses that you can convert to sort of add floors onto them and convert them into flats. And that's a kind of quite a specific one, saying, well, those need to be in the right location. So with that, we've built into the search using this kind of clever LiDAR stuff where you just check the neighboring buildings are bigger than the building that we're looking at in effect. So a number of kind of quite cool things. So these various strategies hit all those big headlines that Dan's been talking about, and make sure that you kind of got a really good chance of getting those PD rights to apply as part of that. So if anybody's interested, we'll give that just another 10 seconds. Anybody's interested in any of those, then feel free just to answer that. And then perhaps Dan, have you managed to pick out sort of a question you'd like to answer?
Yeah, I've answered a couple of them directly, but there's a couple here quite interesting. So it's a question from Clive Gilbertson about the natural light. Can light be provided with an interior window at high level in a bedroom or a light wall? The answer to that in brief is yes. It can be, subject to meeting the additional requirements of the of ventilation, background and purge ventilation. under the building regulations, but it's a technique that we use and it's largely for studios and micro flats, for want of a better word, where there is insufficient light available for every room, so we turn it into one room with an internal glazed wall. So yes, that can be done. The other interesting question from Yogesh Patel, wondering why planners don't follow government direction and they resist planning applications. Blimey, how long have we got? Fundamentally, a planning officer is under, much as I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for them, they're under a fair degree of pressure from various sources. So they're under pressure from the applicant to determine their application positively. They're under pressure from the development control department to meet their deadlines of determination. They also will receive pressure from local members who have been consulted over certain planning applications. When I say local members, so local councillors, who will want their electorate's voice to be heard in the determination of the application. They have direct access to the planning officer, as does every individual who cares to pick up the phone to complain about something. So they are really sat in a position with a lot of pressure from a lot of sources, and have to and should be determining the application in line with policy and the particular context of the site. Sometimes it's just an impossible task to resolve, and quite often there is the political weight overweighs policy or legitimate benefits of the scheme, and that comes back to the changes the government want to make to take out this additional layer of democratic process from the planning application system to allow more schemes to be consented quicker.
I suppose in those kind of examples, that's when you take it to appeal, and you and I, Dan, have been successful in a number of those cases where local councillors managed to get the ear of or someone in the local community's got the ear of the local councillor, or local councillor lives nearby and doesn't want it or something, or maybe they managed to bend the ear of the officer. You get a refusal on a site you should have got a consent on, and take it to appeal, and you get it, don't you? It's kind of it's one of those sort of it's painful and annoying, but you can usually get through the journey.
It is, yeah, and the appeal system is there as an impartial process. Strange. It is possible still to have a perfectly legitimate scheme turned down at appeal, and very often that's based on the particular judgments of the individual inspector. And sometimes, Ranjan, this comes down to basically they don't like the way it looks. So
no, I know. I mean, I know I sound a little bit, back in 2005,
no, you're right.
we had a planning scheme went to appeal for a few flats. The local MP, the proposer gets to speak for 3 minutes, the opposer gets to speak for 3 minutes, and they got their locals got their local MP to speak. That local MP was Jeremy Corbyn, before he became famous. And he said about me that he is a greedy developer who gets what he wants from the planning system by stealth. Which was actually true, because I'd implemented a whole bunch of PD, under obeying all the rules, implemented a PD to enhance the envelope and then applying for planning permission on top of that. So 30 locals turned up and there was a petition and all of that. The council had to reject it there, and because they didn't want to make the decision that went against the locals for political reasons. It went to appeal and won. So it was purely political.
Yeah.
They had to give them a win, which was a pain in the ass for us because it, delayed things. But they didn't have a leg to stand on, but they didn't want to be seen to be. They wanted it to be the nasty appeals inspector, the central government people making the nasty decision.
It's a handoff, isn't it? That's what it is. Let somebody else make the decision for us, and that's what the costs applications are supposed to protect against, is that a successful appeal can be supplemented with a cost application to recover some of the unnecessary expense that the developer applicant has incurred as a result of the daft decision made at a local planning authority level. Whether it's equitable or not is it's never enough, if you ask me.
Well, I guess I think we've sort of run out of time. So what I wanted to say, really, last thing from me really is to say thank you. So thank you very much indeed. Firstly, Dan, thank you very much indeed for your time. Great
Pleasure.
in terms of what we can and can't do. And we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow, obviously, on the follow-up webinar tomorrow morning. Thank you so much indeed.
No, afternoon.
Dan, we'll see you soon. And Ranjan, thank you also yourself. Thank you so much indeed for coming today. Thank you for sharing the content. Thank you for all the thoughts. I've really got my mind thinking about kind of that graph of commercial property and residential property and how that works. So really insightful. And thank you so much indeed.
Thank you for inviting me. I wanted to say also thank you to Dan, but he's just left. Brilliant presentation. It's pretty. I'll message him later, but that was great.
Good to see you. Thank you so much indeed. And I suppose finally, just from me, is a thank you to all of you for watching. We can't do this without you. We love doing this. It's great fun. And so thank you very much indeed. I've been Paul Davis from Nimbus Maps. We'll look forward to seeing you soon. All the best.